At 12:14 a.m. on September 26, 1983, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov sat alone in a bunker 100 kilometers south of Moscow, watching computer screens that controlled the fate of 8 billion lives. 44 years old, 14 years with the Soviet Air Defense Forces, duty officer at Serpukhov 15, the nerve center of the Soviet Union's OKO satellite early warning system. The OKO system had been operational for less than a year. New, prone to glitches, already showing problems. But when the alarm screamed at 12:14 a.m., it wasn't reporting a glitch. It was reporting nuclear war. Red letters flashed across the screen. Launch. One American intercontinental ballistic missile, heading for Soviet territory, minutes away. Then another alarm. Launch. And another. Launch. And another. Launch. 5 American ICBMs, all heading toward the Soviet Union. Protocol was clear. Report the attack immediately to Soviet High Command. They would order immediate nuclear retaliation. Thousands of Soviet missiles would launch within minutes. The United States would detect the launches and fire everything it had. NATO would join. 8 billion people would face nuclear holocaust. Petrov had approximately 10 minutes to decide. He picked up the phone to report the attack. Then he put it down. The year 1983 had been the most dangerous year of the Cold War. More dangerous than the Cuban Missile Crisis. More dangerous than any moment since Hiroshima. But most people didn't know it yet because the world was sleepwalking toward annihilation while arguing about other things. March 8th, 1983. President Ronald Reagan stood before the National Association of Evangelicals in Orlando, Florida, and called the Soviet Union an evil empire. Not a rival, not an adversary, evil. The speech electrified Americans. It horrified Moscow. Soviet General Secretary Yuri Andropov had been head of the KGB before taking power in November 1982. A paranoid man leading a paranoid system. He believed Reagan's rhetoric signaled something worse than Cold War posturing. He believed it meant war. In 1981, Andropov had launched Operation Ryan. The acronym stood for Raketno-Yadernoye Napadenie, nuclear missile attack. The operation's purpose: find evidence that the United States and NATO were preparing a nuclear first strike against the Soviet Union. KGB officers worldwide received orders to watch for signs. Unusual activity at NATO bases, changes in blood bank operations, increased pizza deliveries to the Pentagon at odd hours, anything that might indicate mobilization for nuclear war. The operation found nothing, but that didn't calm Soviet fears. It amplified them. Then came September 1st, 1983, Korean Airlines Flight 007, a Boeing 747 flying from New York to Seoul via Anchorage. The aircraft strayed off course, entered Soviet airspace over the Kamchatka Peninsula. Soviet fighters scrambled, tracked the airliner for over 2 hours. At 3:26 a.m. Korean time, a Soviet Su-15 interceptor fired 2 air-to-air missiles. Korean Airlines Flight 007 disintegrated. All 269 people aboard died, including 61 Americans. Among them, Congressman Larry McDonald of Georgia. President Reagan addressed the nation, called it an act of barbarism, proof of the evil empire's nature. The Soviets claimed the airliner was a spy plane, American provocation, an intelligence-gathering mission disguised as a civilian flight. Neither side believed the other. Tension spiked to levels not seen in decades. September 26, 1983, came 25 days after the shootdown, and Stanislav Petrov drew the night shift. Petrov was born September 7, 1939, near Vladivostok in the Soviet Far East. His father, Yevgraf, flew fighter aircraft in World War II. His mother was a nurse. Military service defined the family. Young Stanislav enrolled at the Kiev Military Aviation Engineering Academy, graduated in 1972, joined the Soviet Air Defense Forces with a specialty in radar and satellite systems. Smart, methodical, not a party zealot, not a careerist, a technical specialist who understood computers and their limitations better than most of his colleagues. He met Raisa while stationed in the Far East. She worked as a cinema operator. They married in 1973, had 2 children, a son, Dmitri, and a daughter, Yelena. By 1983, Petrov had risen to lieutenant colonel. Not a glamorous rank, not a general, but high enough to be trusted with responsibility, low enough that nobody would second-guess his decisions. The Serpukhov 15 bunker sat deep underground in the forest south of Moscow. Blast-proof, radiation-shielded, designed to survive a nearby nuclear strike and continue functioning. Inside, rows of computer terminals monitored the Oko satellite constellation. Oko means eye in Russian. The system used infrared sensors on satellites in highly elliptical Molniya orbits to detect the heat signature of missile launches. When an American ICBM launched, its rocket engines would burn at thousands of degrees. The Oko satellites would see that heat from space, alert the command center, give Soviet leadership approximately 20 to 25 minutes warning before the warheads arrived. 20 minutes to verify the attack, decide on retaliation, launch Soviet missiles, end the world. The system had gone operational in 1982, less than a year old, still working out bugs. And it had bugs. Earlier in 1983, the system had generated false alarms, sunlight reflecting off clouds, sensor malfunctions, computer errors. But the Soviets needed it operational. American Minuteman III missiles could reach Moscow in 30 minutes. Soviet ground-based radar couldn't detect launches until missiles cleared the horizon. By then, only 15 minutes remained. Not enough time to decide anything, so they launched Oko satellites, stationed officers like Petrov at command centers, gave them the impossible job of determining, in minutes, whether incoming data represented the end of the world or a computer glitch. Petrov's shift began at midnight, September 26th. His usual commander was absent. Petrov was filling in. He sat at the duty officer station surrounded by computer terminals and communication equipment. 4 minutes past midnight became 12:14 a.m. The alarm screamed. Red letters. Launch. 1 missile. From the United States, high confidence. The computers had run 29 levels of verification checks. All confirmed. Petrov stared at the screen. Protocol required immediate notification up the chain of command. He would call the duty officer at Soviet military headquarters. That officer would inform the Soviet General Staff. They would wake General Secretary Andropov. Andropov would have perhaps 10 minutes to decide. Was this real? If real, Soviet doctrine was clear. Launch on warning, fire everything immediately because waiting meant Soviet missiles would be destroyed in their silos. Waiting meant losing the ability to retaliate. Waiting meant accepting annihilation. But if Petrov was wrong, if he failed to report a real attack, the Soviet Union would lose precious minutes. By the time anyone else noticed, American warheads would be incoming. Soviet leadership would die without the chance to retaliate. Petrov's career, his life, the lives of everyone he knew, hung on the decision. He reached for the phone to report the attack. Then another alarm. Launch. Second missile, then a third. Launch. Fourth. Launch. Fifth. Launch. Five American ICBMs, all confirmed by the satellite system. High confidence, every verification check passing. The bunker filled with noise, alarms blaring, officers shouting, everyone looking at Petrov for orders. Petrov sat frozen, staring at the screens. 5 missiles. Why 5? The thought wouldn't leave his mind. If the United States was launching a nuclear first strike, why only 5 missiles? America had over 1,000 ICBMs, hundreds of submarine-launched missiles. If Washington wanted to decapitate the Soviet Union, to destroy Moscow and Soviet nuclear forces before they could respond, they would launch everything at once. Hundreds of missiles, overwhelming force, 5 missiles made no sense as a first strike. 5 missiles was barely enough to hit Moscow and a few military targets. It would leave most of Soviet nuclear arsenal intact. America would guarantee its own destruction in retaliation. Unless it wasn't an attack. Unless it was a malfunction. But the computers showed high confidence. 29 verification checks. The system was designed specifically to prevent false alarms. Every check had passed. Petrov tried to verify with ground-based radar. The Soviet Union had a network of early warning radar stations. If American missiles were actually in flight, ground radar would detect them within minutes as they cleared the horizon. He called the radar stations. Nothing. The radars saw nothing. But that didn't prove anything. The radars wouldn't detect missiles this soon. Petrov knew that. If the satellite data was correct, ground radar wouldn't confirm for another 5 to 8 minutes. By then, it might be too late to launch a counterstrike. The protocol was clear. When the satellite system reported an attack with high confidence, report immediately. Don't wait for ground radar confirmation. Those minutes might be the difference between retaliation and annihilation. Petrov's hand hovered over the phone. He thought about the new system, barely a year old, already prone to glitches. He thought about his training in computer systems. He knew how software could fail, how sensors could misinterpret data. He thought about 5 missiles, the strategic absurdity of a 5-missile first strike. He thought about starting World War III based on a computer readout. He made his decision. Petrov called the Soviet Military Command Center, not to report an attack, to report a system malfunction. "I'm seeing missile launch alerts, Vasumanchert," he said, "but I assess this as a false alarm. System error. No attack confirmed by ground radar." The voice on the other end demanded clarification. The computer showed high confidence. Why was he calling it a false alarm? "Ground radar shows nothing," Petrov said. "The satellite system is unreliable. This doesn't match the profile of a real attack. I'm calling it a malfunction." "Are you certain?" No, he wasn't certain. Not even close. "Yes," Petrov said. "False alarm." He hung up the phone. Now he waited. If he was right, nothing would happen. The alarms would stop. Ground radar would continue showing empty skies. The sun would rise. Another day would pass. If he was wrong, he had roughly 15 minutes to live. American warheads would detonate over Soviet territory. He wouldn't even know until the flash. The bunker might survive the initial blast, but Moscow would be gone. His family in Fryazino, 20 kilometers from the capital, would die instantly. And because Petrov failed to report the attack, the Soviet Union would not retaliate, would not fire its missiles, would not have the chance for vengeance. 8 billion people were alive because Stanislav Petrov didn't trust a computer. The minutes crawled past. 12:20 a.m., 6 minutes since the first alarm, no ground radar confirmation. 12:25 a.m., 11 minutes, still nothing. 12:30 a.m., 16 minutes since the alert. More than enough time for missiles to clear the horizon. Ground radar saw nothing because there was nothing to see. The alarms stopped. The red letters faded from the screens. The bunker fell quiet except for the hum of computers and the breathing of men who had just lived through the edge of nuclear war without knowing it. Petrov sat back in his chair. His hands were shaking. Investigation would later determine what happened. The Oko satellite system had been positioned perfectly to catch sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds over North Dakota. The angle of the sun, the altitude of the clouds, the satellite's orbit, all aligned in a rare configuration. The infrared sensors saw the reflected sunlight, interpreted it as the heat signature of missile launches. 5 separate clouds, 5 separate reflections, 5 missiles that never existed. The computer ran its 29 verification checks. All passed. Because the system was checking for sensor data consistency, not external verification. The sensors saw heat signatures. The computer believed the sensors. High confidence. Nobody had programmed the system to account for sunlight reflecting off clouds during the autumn equinox. an oversight in satellite positioning, a flaw in sensor design, a bug that nearly ended civilization. But Stanislav Petrov didn't wait for an investigation that night. He filed his report. System malfunction, false alarm, duty officer assessment, no attack. Then his shift ended at 8 o'clock a.m. He went home to Fryazino, told his wife Raisa nothing about what happened. Classified information. State secrets. Even she couldn't know. He slept, woke the next day, went back to work. And for months, nobody outside the Soviet military knew how close the world had come to ending. The Soviet military knew. They investigated, interrogated Petrov extensively, demanded to know why he violated protocol, why he didn't report the alert immediately as required, why he trusted his judgment over the computer system. Petrov explained his reasoning. 5 missiles made no strategic sense. Ground radar showed nothing. The OCO system had a history of false alarms. He made a judgment call based on experience and strategic logic. The Soviet military listened. Then they quietly shelved his career. No promotion, no punishment, just silence. Petrov was reassigned, given menial positions, told to keep quiet about September 26th. The incident was classified. Embarrassing. The new satellite system had nearly started World War III. Better to bury the story than celebrate the man who prevented it. Petrov took early retirement in 1984 at age 45. Left the military with a modest pension. Settled in Fryazino with his family. For years, nobody outside the Soviet command structure knew his name. But the incident leaked. Slowly, through the chaos of Glasnost and the Soviet collapse, someone told someone who told someone else. By the late 90s, Western analysts heard rumors of a false alarm in 1983. A Soviet officer who defied protocol. They started asking questions. In 1998, the story broke publicly. Stanislav Petrov, September 26, 1983. The man who single-handedly prevented nuclear war. Western media called him the man who saved the world. Russia didn't. Russian military officials remained largely silent. Some disputed his importance. Others claimed the chain of command would have caught the error anyway. That Soviet leadership wouldn't have launched based on satellite data alone. But people who studied Soviet nuclear doctrine knew better. The Soviet system operated on launch on warning. When satellites detected an attack, protocol demanded immediate response. Minutes mattered. Hesitation meant death. If Petrov had reported the alert as real, Soviet military command would have informed Andropov immediately. Andropov, already paranoid about American first strikes, would have faced the impossible choice. With 5 American missiles incoming and minutes to decide, would he risk waiting, or would he launch everything? Nobody knows for certain. But experts who studied Soviet war plans believe Andropov would have launched. The paranoia of 1983, the shootdown of KL-07, Operation Ryan's obsession with American attack plans, Andropov's KGB background, his tendency toward worst-case thinking, all pointed one direction. If Petrov had made a different call, Soviet missiles would have launched within 10 minutes. Over 1,400 strategic nuclear warheads, targeting American cities, military bases, command centers. American early warning systems would have detected the launches immediately. President Reagan would have faced the same impossible choice. Hundreds of American missiles would have fired in response. The nuclear exchange would have taken approximately 30 minutes from first launch to last detonation. Major cities on both sides gone in the first wave: Moscow, Washington, New York, Leningrad, Los Angeles, Kiev, Chicago, Minsk. Military targets obliterated. ICBM silos, Air Force bases, naval ports, command bunkers, anything that could shoot back. Then the secondary targets: industrial centers, transportation hubs, infrastructure. Casualties in the first hour, estimated between 200 million and 400 million dead. Most killed instantly by the blasts or thermal radiation. But that would be just the beginning. Nuclear winter. Smoke from burning cities would blot out the sun. Global temperatures would plummet. Crops would fail. Mass starvation. Radiation fallout. Cancers. Birth defects. Contamination of water supplies. An agricultural land for decades. Collapse of civilization. No functioning governments. No international trade. No modern medical care. Survivors would face medieval conditions in a poisoned world. Estimated total deaths between 500 million and 5 billion people, depending on how many nuclear weapons fired, how much infrastructure survived, how quickly civilization recovered. 8 billion people were alive in 1983. Perhaps half would have died because of a computer glitch, because satellites mistook clouds for missiles, because one man was sitting at a console at the exact moment when his judgment mattered more than anything else in history. Stanislav Petrov prevented that scenario by trusting his instincts over a computer that passed every verification check. His reward was career destruction and decades of obscurity. In later years, international recognition came slowly. In 2004, the Association of World Citizens honored Petrov at the United Nations, presented him with a World Citizen Award. In 2006, he traveled to the United States, met with American military officials, spoke about the incident, received appreciation from people who owed their lives to his decision. In 2011, German media gave him the Dresden Peace Prize. In 2013, documentary filmmaker Peter Anthony released The Man Who Saved the World, featuring Petrov telling his story in detail. But Petrov remained modest about his role. In interviews, he downplayed his heroism, called himself a regular officer who made a technical judgment, nothing special. "I was just at the right place at the right time," he said in 2013. "I wasn't heroic. I was terrified, but someone had to make a decision." His personal life was difficult. His wife Raisa died of cancer in 1997. Petrov lived alone in his small apartment in Fryazino. Modest pension. Declining health. He suffered from depression in his later years. The weight of what he'd experienced. The knowledge that 8 billion lives had depended on his judgment for 10 minutes one night in 1983. The lack of recognition from his own country. "I did my job," he told visitors, "but I could have been wrong. I had no way to be certain. If I was wrong, millions would have died because I didn't report the attack in time." That thought never leaves you. He was right to worry. The investigation confirmed the satellite malfunction, but it also confirmed that Petrov violated protocol. The system was designed with redundancy specifically to prevent officer error. By trusting his judgment over the computer, Petrov had inserted human judgment into a system designed to eliminate it. In a different scenario, with a real attack, that judgment could have been fatal. But on September 26, 1983, it saved the world. Stanislav Petrov died on May 19, 2017, in his apartment in Fryazino. He was 77 years old. Cause of death: pneumonia. His death went unnoticed for months. He lived alone. Few visitors. When someone finally checked on him in September 2017, he had been dead for 4 months. Karl Schumacher, a German friend who had worked on the documentary, notified international media. The story of Petrov's death spread globally. Obituaries appeared in major publications worldwide: The New York Times, The Guardian, BBC, all recounting the story of September 26, 1983, all calling him the man who saved the world. Russian media coverage was muted. A few brief mentions. No state funeral. No official honors from the Russian government. Petrov is survived by his son Dmitry and daughter Yelena. Both live private lives away from public attention. On September 26, 2018, 35 years to the day after the incident, the Future of Life Institute awarded Petrov a posthumous Future of Life Award at the United Nations. His daughter Elena accepted, held the trophy, thanked those who remembered her father. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres spoke at the ceremony. Let us resolve to work together to realize a world free from fear of nuclear weapons, remembering the courageous judgment of Stanislav Petrov. The award, a small trophy, recognition that came 35 years too late, and 1 year after Petrov died, alone in a small Russian town. Today, September 26th, is commemorated by some as Petrov Day, a reminder of how close we came, how fragile our survival can be, how one person's judgment in one moment can determine whether 8 billion people live or die. The Serpukhov 15 bunker still exists. Abandoned now, rusting, overtaken by forest. The computers that nearly ended the world are long since obsolete. The Oko satellite system was replaced in the 1990s and 2000s by more advanced systems. Modern Russian early warning satellites use better sensors, more sophisticated software, multiple verification methods, but they're still operated by humans, officers sitting in bunkers, watching screens, making judgments about whether incoming data represents the end of the world or a technical glitch. In 2025, that system is still in place. American satellites watch Russia. Russian satellites watch America. Both sides maintain thousands of nuclear weapons on alert, ready to launch within minutes. The Cold War ended. The Soviet Union collapsed. But the nuclear weapons remain. The early warning systems remain. The 10-minute window between detection and annihilation remains. And somewhere, officers like Stanislav Petrov sit at consoles, waiting for alarms that might mean nothing or might mean everything. The story matters because it reveals the fragility of nuclear deterrence. We survive because systems work, because computers function correctly, because sensors don't malfunction, because officers make the right judgment calls. But on September 26, 1983, the system failed. The computers failed. The sensors misinterpreted data. Everything failed except one man's judgment. And 8 billion people are alive because Stanislav Petrov, tired, uncertain, terrified, decided to trust strategic logic over a high-confidence computer alert. He had no way to be certain he was right. The ground radar hadn't confirmed anything yet. The computers insisted the attack was real. Protocol demanded he report immediately. He chose differently, and we're all here because of it. That's the part that haunts anyone who studies this incident. The margin was the thin. One officer, one decision, 10 minutes of doubt that prevented 10,000 years of human civilization from ending in 30 minutes of nuclear exchange. We owe our existence to a Soviet lieutenant colonel who died alone, largely forgotten by his own country, with a modest pension and a small apartment, and the knowledge that he could have been wrong. He wasn't a spy who stole secrets, wasn't a diplomat who negotiated peace, wasn't a general who won battles. He was a technical specialist who drew the night shift on September 26, 1983, and made a judgment call based on incomplete information and strategic instinct. That's all it took. One person, one moment, one choice, and 8 billion lives. If this story mattered to you, do something for me right now. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube's algorithm to show this story to more people. Stories like this don't get told unless people like you make them visible. Hit subscribe and click the notification bell. We're pulling stories like this from declassified archives, historical records, and forgotten files every single week. Real decisions, real consequences, real people who shaped history in ways most never learned about. Drop a comment right now. Tell me where you're watching from. US, UK, Russia? Doesn't matter. This community is worldwide. If you studied Cold War history, if you work in military or intelligence fields, if someone in your family served during this era, let me know. Or just type, "never forget," so we know you're here. You're not just a viewer. You're part of making sure Stanislav Petrov isn't forgotten. You're part of making sure the next generation understands how close we came, how fragile our survival has been. Our community is strong now, from dozens of countries. Every single one of you matters. One more thing. Share this video. Text it to someone who's into Cold War history. Post it on social media. Whatever. This story deserves a bigger audience than it gets. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making sure Stanislav Petrov stays alive in memory. Thank you for understanding that September 26, 1983 was the day one man's doubt prevented 8 billion deaths. These weren't just computers and satellites and protocols. This was the moment human judgment proved more valuable than any system we could build. See you in the next story.